Hello, I'm Mike and this is Will. We are the Tabletop Donkeys.
Hello.
In this video we're looking at the complete collection of Warhammer 40,000 Imperium magazine. So we'll have a look over all the models we got as part of the collection, and then we'll have an overall discussion about our thoughts of the collection and cost savings and how it went and all that. Well, as I said, we'll have a discussion on the collection as a whole, but I'll hand you over to Will, who will take us through all the models in the collection first.
So here you can see all the models and terrain that we got with the Imperium collection. If you saw our video for issue 80 of the Imperium magazine, then you'll have seen most of this before, because we've only added the extra few models from the bonus 10 issues 81 to 90, but we'll go over the full collection nonetheless. So starting with the Imperial forces. On the right-hand side of your picture, we've got the Space Marines, which form the largest contingent, and then on the left is the Adeptus Mechanicus in the front and the Battle Sisters behind. Going over the Space Marine forces first, starting at the front, we have the characters we got. From left to right, in the first two rows, there is the Phobos Lieutenant, the Blade Guard Lieutenant with Neo-Volkite pistol and shield, the Phobos Librarian, the Primaris Captain, who is the exclusive miniature to this magazine collection, and then Marnius Calgar and his two Victrix Honor Guard, and finally Primarch Rabute Gilliman. Moving backwards, we have 2 units of 5 Assault Intercessors, a unit of 3 easy-to-build Assault Intercessors with the Ultramarines markings, a unit of 10 Infiltrators, 3 Aggressors with Flamestorm Gauntlets, and 3 Eliminators with Bolt Sniper Rifles, 3 Outriders, 3 Suppressors, finally in the back, the Primaris Invader ATV, the Firestrike Servo Turret, and a Redemptor Dreadnought. Then for the Adeptus Mechanicus contingent, we've got 3 characters, the Tech Priest Dominus, the Tech Priest Engine Seer, and the Skitarii Marshal, a unit of 10 Skitarii Rangers, and a unit of 3 Cataphron Destroyers. Or you can also see here in the bottom right, Lord Inquisitor Kyria Draxus, who was from one of the bonus issues, who obviously doesn't fit into any of these factions, but she is part of the collection, so she's here. And finally, for the Imperium, looking at the Adeptus Sororitas contingent, we have the Canoness at the front, as well as the Repentia Superior, in front of 4 Sisters Repentia and 10 Battle Sisters. Then behind them are 3 Archoflagellants, 5 Seraphim, a Penitent Engine, and 3 Paragon Warsuits. So all in all, that's a total of 91 Imperial models. That's 46 Space Marines, 16 Adeptus Mechanicus, 28 Adeptus Sororitas, and 1 Agent of the Imperium. And moving on to the Necron half of the collection now, this is 74 models, starting at the front again with the characters. From left to right, we've got Illuminor Xeras, who was in the final issue, the Catacomb Command Barge, the Hexmark Destroyer, the Scorpec Destroyer Lord, the Royal Warden, Overlord with Resurrection Orb and Void Scythe, Chronomancer, the Technomancer, and Plasmancer, and 2 Crypto Thralls. In the row behind them is 5 Lich Guard with Wolf Scythes and 5 Immortals with Gauss Blasters. Behind them, 10 Necron Warriors with Gauss Flayers and 10 with Gauss Reapers. There are 3 more Necron Warriors with Gauss Flayers, the easy-to-build ones behind them, as well as 5 Deathmarks and 5 Flayed ones. 1 Locust Heavy Destroyer, 3 Scorpec Destroyers with a Canoptek Plasma Sight, a Canoptek Spider, and 2 units of 3 Canoptek Scarab Swarms. And in the back row, we have a Triarch Stalker, a Canoptek Reanimator, 3 Canoptek Wraiths, and 3 Tomb Blades. And then finally, along the back, we can have a look at the terrain collection that came with the magazine. So on the left-hand side, we have 3 Munitorum armoured containers with crates and barrels that go with those. 2 sets of ruins, they're both identical, so there's 2 different ruins in each set. And finally, 2 Hemotrope reactors and 2 sets of thermic plasma conduits. So that's a look at all of the miniatures from the 90 issues of Imperium magazine, laid out on 4 of the larger battle mats that came with the magazine. There's also a smaller battle mat not pictured. Likewise, not pictured are the Range Ruler, 12 dice, wound markers and objectives, the 31 paints, 3 brushes and a texture tool. Also not pictured are any of the subscriber or premium gifts. But I'll hand you back to Mike now, and we will give you our thoughts on the magazine overall.
Yeah, so I think, it's another good collection. Perhaps a little less terrain, but I think people generally want more models rather than just terrain. It is kind of nice to have, say, Gilliman and Xeras as the kind of end topping off to the collection, as opposed to the gantry that was in Conquest. And obviously, pretty much everything you've got a saving on, apart from things like paints. The total price for all 90 issues from the original 80 is just over £800, £800 and 10 pence, whereas the total cost to buy all of these models individually, roughly roughly about the time when the magazine was coming out. Probably be more expensive now. It was about £1,443. So you're getting about 45% saving overall. You do technically lose money on all the issues with paints, because generally you only got 2, but you get so much saving on some of the models that easily cancels it out. Particularly things like characters, the plasma conduits, which I believe are out of print, the immortals and deathmarks, the spider, the flayed ones at roughly about a 72% decrease. Again, they've probably gone up. And the Necron Raw Court was roughly about an 87% saving on that, because that must be at least 70 odd quid now, I think.
Yeah, and the distribution of models was a little bit better than previous magazines in the sense that there were some issues of Mortal Realms and Conquest magazine where you could get a really large number of models in a single issue. Quite often those were sprues from the starter sets. There wasn't so much of that here, because although a lot of this stuff was from the starter sets, the sprues were divided up a little bit more sensibly. But there were still some issues that were really good if you were actually just getting these issues for building armies, particularly things like the Immortals and the Deathmarks. Getting 5 in a single issue, you could easily get a squad of 10 for a great saving over buying a box of 10, for example.
And obviously this doesn't include any of the premium stuff, which added a couple of other factions like the Tau, Chaos, Orcs and Tyranids. Those premium kits added an extra £2 to the overall price of each issue, but once again, if you work out the price to buy the models in those premium sets individually, you'd still get a saving overall. And I guess for the magazine itself, I would say the production quality is better. Some quite odd mistakes in the previous issues. There's only one I can really think of where one of the mission descriptions doesn't make sense.
Yeah, we certainly didn't see the kind of level of proofreading errors that we saw in Conquest and Mortal Realms.
Yeah, and the layout of things like lore and painting guides, I can't really complain. It was much the same as in Conquest, and it was generally a decent pace of introducing new things. And I do like how they use the battle records, so you can keep track of all your units. That'd be quite a nice little narrative thing to do, especially with the campaign. I think they introduced new rules certainly slower than Conquest, although some things were introduced a lot quicker, like command points, I believe. It's definitely a lot faster than Mortal Realms was, which took a very long time to introduce even things like objectives. Generally more variety than Mortal Realms again, but less variety than Conquest. We didn't get any weird little narrative missions, like where it was just a unit of 5 scouts versus some poxorgs and a marine, that sort of thing. Although we did get the narrative campaign for the last 10 issues, which was quite a nice way of almost introducing sort of Crusade, the more narrative arm of 40k. Because I think the final battle of issue 80, I suppose, is a nice stopping point, but it kind of doesn't really round off the whole issue of the Necrons building their big pylon.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about the game balance in a minute, but the missions were a little bit more balanced. I think it still did get a little bit tedious towards the end in terms of the mission design, because for the last 20 issues or so, the mission was pretty much the same every time. It was the same objectives, just with minor changes and twists, different deployment zones and things like that. But saying that, I think the way the majority of people play these games is actually just through sort of pick-up games, playing in your local gaming store or whatever, where you want to be able to play what would be called match play. And these rules in the mission packs we got did pretty much follow what would be match play, at least it was in 9th edition, with the fairly standard primary objective and then the choice of secondary objectives. So I suppose it did actually introduce you to that.
Yeah, I mean, it could have done with a bit more variety in secondary objectives, and it probably would have been nice to have a few more stratagems for each side. Some of them were very niche. If I were running my own narrative campaign, I might put in some smaller missions just to break things up, because I think with 75 power, especially for the Necrons, we often saw very similar armies.
Yeah, again, we'll talk about the overall balance of models in the collection, but for the Necrons, having only 3 troops choices and being forced to bring them every game did get a little bit dull.
We did keep track of which side won each battle, and it was fairly even until we were allowed to choose our own units, where the Imperium started to pull out a bit of a lead. Probably shouldn't read too much into that, because it doesn't account for things like board size and things. There are some games where I think it was on a single mat, and certain melee units are a lot more effective on smaller boards and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the Necrons were generally a little bit more effective when the armies started closer and on a smaller board, because then some of those dangerous melee units can get in much quicker without being shot to bits before they get there. But broadly speaking, it was, I think, more balanced than either of the 2 previous magazines, where one side by the end had more of a clear advantage. And also the Imperium in general were a little bit more effective when they were able to mix their forces from the 3 factions together. I think it's because they, particularly the AdMech, compensate for some of the weaknesses of the other 2 factions.
The undisputed best combination, definitely Battle Sisters and AdMech with 100% win rate, so if you want to win every tournament, that's what you should go with. Yeah, and then moving on to the sort of collections of each armies as as a whole. I think they're both pretty good mixes. I think, say, the Space Marines are perhaps a bit melee heavy, and having such a small contingent of AdMech isn't necessarily the best, but both that and the Battle Assist are good starting points if you wanted to expand on both of those collections. And the Necron one I think is fairly good. Probably would go for a bit more Warriors if you were looking to expand it. But
yeah, we might do a separate video about expanding the collection as we've done with the two previous collections that we finished. But yeah, in general, both collections, just looking at them on the table, they're quite well-rounded.
Certainly Conquest is a bit more character heavy and there's a bit more redundancy. Yeah. There's a bit more balance in that regard. And there's no odd choices, you might say. There's no very old kits, Horus Heresy era captains kicking about. It's mostly all newer sculpts.
And I suppose the poor child, as it were, of the collection, unfortunately, is the Adeptus Mechanicus, simply because, as we've said before, they get 3 characters and 2 units. It feels like they could have had a slightly more interesting AdMech collection.
The engine here really doesn't fit all that well.
The Battle Sisters do fine if you added just a few more things and maybe a vehicle or two. The AdMech would need quite a few more additions to make more of an army out of, I think. And we did say at the time we got the Skitarii Marshal that he's nice, but for the 10 bonus issues, he was definitely the weakest of the additions.
You really want to have him in amongst of a lot of Skitarii to get the most out of him.
And the AdMech have several units they could have given us instead that might have just been a little bit more interesting. But nevertheless, a good foundation for 2 armies and a starting point for 2 others.
I think I would actually say it's slightly better than Conquest, just because it's a little bit more interesting for the Imperium at the very least, because you've got all the different factions and you don't have any weird old models.
Yeah, and I think actually for the Imperium, if we had just a full Space Marine collection, I think it would have actually been a little bit less interesting, because I think they would have just padded it out with more characters and more random units. Actually having the 3 different factions has been a little bit more interesting, although I was a little bit sceptical at first when it was first announced.
Yeah, though I will say, actually, possibly the last 10 issues was a little bit unfair for the Necrons, seeing as they only got 2 characters compared to, say, the Dreadnought and the Paragon Warsuits.
Yeah, considering that in theory you've got 2 factions, the Necrons only got 2 of the 10 issues devoted to them, so something else might have been nice, but nevertheless. And the same with the terrain collection, actually. You can do quite a lot with this terrain. It has subbed in for a lot of different battlefields over the course of the last 90 issues and different planets, but if you just want something to put on your table, then there's probably enough here.
I would say it's a good amount of terrain for all 4 battle mats put together to make it interesting.
It's only a shame, actually, that the ruins weren't tall enough to give the obscuring rule in 9th edition. They would have had to be a bit taller to block line of sight completely, which is very important in 40k line of sight blocking, so it's a shame that wasn't the case, but the reason for that is just because they gave us the easy-to-build ruins that are very easy for beginners to put together, so we can't really complain too much about that.
Yeah, and we got brushes to get you going, although I think you did get, if you subscribed, you did get some more. It might have taken you a very long time to paint the Dreadnought and the Chark Stalker with those, but and a decent variety of paints, and we didn't get any refills of any, unlike Conquest, so it'd be interesting to see if anyone actually did start running out. And it's a good collection to start off with. I mean, it's certainly enough to follow all the painting guides, I'd reckon. And once again, the painting and modelling tutorials are all fairly well paced. I mean, I do know someone who did actually follow through the magazines in order and came out with a painted army of Ultramarines, so it should be fairly easy to follow. And I mean, overall, again, I think it's a good collection, certainly for beginners, or if you were looking to introduce someone into the hobby, you could possibly split the magazine and play along with them. So one player gets Necrons, one player gets Imperium. Obviously, introduce your stuff at a decent pace. It's quite a good learning tool. If you're a veteran player, probably better off just buying individual issues of things you want or are interested in getting. So especially if you want more characters or are only interested in the Space Marine, say, just get those issues.
And speaking as someone who's acquired a Necron army through this magazine, it's been quite fun to play them, to be honest. Their rules in 9th weren't the most powerful. They're rather better in 10th, but having a completed army, having had to paint them for these videos, has actually been quite rewarding, and I quite like the result.
And if you're interested, you can actually see all of the Space Marine part of this collection, plus the Space Marines from Conquest and some more in the State of the Silver Templars video we did. So if you'd like to see how they've developed over the course of both magazines, you can have a look at that. But otherwise, we hope you enjoyed our series. I know it finished quite a bit late, but circumstances are sometimes out of our control. And also, if you did the magazine, I know some people have been commenting and they've been following along, tell us how your collections panned out, whether you're happy with them, what you actually did with them, or if you played any games with them, how you got on. Do leave a comment and subscribe and so on, and leave any comments on what you'd like to see from the channel heading forwards. We were the Tabletop Donkeys, and we'll see you in the next one.
Bye for now.